Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me. My name is Rohit Maheshwari. I manage strategy and products at Subex. And it's really a pleasure for me to be hosting Eric Priezkalns, CEO of Risk and Assurance Group, for this first of four such conversations. Today, we are going to discuss the 2021 Digital Trust Survey of Revenue Assurance, Fraud Management, and Cybersecurity professionals working for communications providers. Eric, thank you so much for joining us and helping us walk through this survey.
Well, thank you, Rohit. And of course, thank you to Subex for being the sponsors of the survey. It's tremendous to have your backing, not only in performing the survey, but in also getting the message out, which of course is really what matters more than anything, is that people learn from the experience of their colleagues, their peers around the industry, and we respond collectively to it. And the findings were absolutely fascinating this year. So I'm very appreciative of Subex's support in pulling together this record survey in terms of the number of participants that we had.
Great. Eric, let's begin by me asking you, if you were to share with me the headlines, right, in terms of findings from the survey, what would they be?
Well, I think everybody already listening to this recording, this show, is aware of the scale, the overall scale, the importance of the amount of money being lost as a result of security breaches, as a result of frauds perpetuated on the customer, as well as frauds perpetuated on the communications provider. And of course, all those revenue leakages, cost leakages that aren't to do with criminal activity, aren't to do with some external party abusing, but to do with the mistakes, for want of a better word, that telcos make that cost them money. We're aware in general that there is a strong cost benefit argument, but we also need to be conscious of the specifics. And what this survey showed us that more than anything is that all of these major categories, cybersecurity, fraud, and the revenue and cost assurance side of things, they're all of pretty similar scale. They're not as big as each other, but they're a pretty similar scale. And if you think about what that means in terms of how that work is conducted within the communications provider, it means that the intelligent approach to doing that work is to be conscious, considerate of the fact that these things are a pretty similar scale, and they're also connected to each other in how you do the work. So it makes no sense for people to do this work in silos. They should be understanding the scale of the problems for their colleagues too, even if they're not in the same organizational unit. Now, the headline figure, the big number from the survey, was 149 billion US dollars. That was the figure that's the total addressable operational leakage, as we call it, because that's covering all the things that could, in theory, be addressed, be reduced, whether that's a fraud suffered by a customer, a fraud suffered by a telco, security breaches. Now, we're never going to live in a perfect world. We'll never get that figure down to zero. But 149 billion US dollars across an industry which is worth 1.6 trillion US dollars in total per annum. Obviously, when you talk about the size of that kind of amount of money, it becomes much more straightforward to talk about why there's good value in investing in improving your cybersecurity, improving your fraud management, improving your revenue assurance. Breaking it down, for the security breaches, this was the largest category, 53.1 billion US dollars across the whole industry. That's about 3.3% of the revenues of the entire industry lost as a result of security breaches. That was the biggest category. The next biggest single category was the revenue assurance style revenue and cost leakages, 42.6 billion US dollars per the survey, about 2.7% of all of the combined revenues of telcos and pay TV providers. When we look at frauds, let's break it down because there's value in breaking this down. The frauds that the communications providers suffer directly as a result of them being defrauded, that was worth 22.2 billion US dollars, about 1.4% of their revenues. They paid compensation to the customers for the frauds that customers suffered. That was about 2.8 billion US dollars, about 0.2% of revenue. So they're not paying that much in compensation relative to the amount they're losing. And that's perhaps a bad sign, because they also estimated that customers are losing 28.6 billion US dollars. That's about 1.8% of what customers spend on telco services as a result of frauds enabled by the abuse of communication services. So enormous numbers there, but you can see how they're all pretty much on a par with each other, with perhaps the exception of the compensation there. And if we're not compensating customers, it's because customers are paying themselves for the frauds that they're suffering. And of course, that leads to bad reputation for telcos. So they need to factor in these intangibles too when we talk about the value of the work we do.
I mean, as you rightly pointed out, some really big numbers. 149 billion is almost equal to 9.3% of total telco revenues. And that's something worth paying attention to very, very clearly. You also pointed out that it was equally kind of spread between cybersecurity, fraud, and assurance. But this is the first survey where we decided to include cybersecurity professionals, right? And specific questions around cybersecurity. Eric, can you walk our audiences through the motivation behind it? Why did we decide to bring in cybersecurity as a key focus area as a part of this survey?
Well, I think one thing to say is that there were already cybersecurity people who were answering the survey previously. We just weren't asking them about security breaches. So the mistake that we had made in the previous year were we were asking people about certain kinds of losses, but we were almost asking some people to split themselves in two and say, I want to talk about half of your work and not the other half of your work. That doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you look at, say, the kinds of work that these people are doing now, the kinds of work that's done, say, for example, when I ask about fraud management, this is increasingly work that takes place in terms of protecting the network from abuse of the network. So even if you were a cybersecurity professional who never thought about fraud management, in reality, what you're doing is you're reducing fraud. So this is, again, we need a joined up picture of the value you're adding to the company. So if you're used to working in an environment where you do your cybersecurity work, but nobody's calculating the impact on fraud, whether the fraud is for your business or for your customers, we're not really understanding the cost-benefit argument. We know that we're spending money on protecting the network. We're not really fully understanding the value that's being generated. So drawing attention to these big sources of value is partly to encourage the communications providers, and in particular to educate the executives within the communications providers about how the investment in a certain improvement in your business's defenses, the way your business assures itself, the way your business audits itself, if you like, an improvement, that's going to be more, there's going to be possibly multiple ways in which you will see the benefit to your company. Whereas if you only count one or two of those ways, you're not really fully understanding the argument for investing in it. So that's why we did it. I mean, the reality was that people are doing the work, and we need to recognize and acknowledge it. And when people are not, when people are in separate silos in their business, we should at least be asking the question, why are you in separate silos? How well do you integrate with each other? And most importantly, can you continue down that path? Because I think, Rohit, this is something that you and your colleagues in Subex feel strongly about, is that as much as telcos went through this burst of energy a few decades ago and were rushing and scrabbling to do all these new things and provide all these new services and learning as you go along. And when you're learning as you go along, you kind of just throw people at problems and hope that they solve the problems, and they don't necessarily coordinate so well. We can't afford to have this lack of coordination anymore, Rohit. And I think this is something that you and your colleagues feel very strongly about. It's because you understand a little bit more how the technology is now changing across the domain of the communications providers and what they do.
Oh, absolutely. I think with 2G, 3G, 4G, I definitely would like to say that it was the communications technology was rather evolving, but with 5G, we're really talking about some revolution happening in the industry, right? What this means is essentially 5G presents both a combination of new kinds of risks, but definitely new kinds of opportunities. One of the things that the survey suggested in terms of common challenges was, the lack of investment in technology so far as revenue assurance, fraud management, and cybersecurity professionals are concerned. But I think the good news was also that executive sponsorship in terms of challenges is no more as intense as it was before. So, very clearly, execs are more and more recognizing the importance of this space. And I definitely, as I look forward into the future, I definitely think this particular space, we will see significantly more attention being paid, significantly more in terms of technology investments happening. Now, the reason I brought up 5G as a space, Eric, is because we are in for some significant changes so far as revenue assurance risks, fraud risks, and cybersecurity risks, as you understand, right? We are likely to see some significant changes in that space, Eric.
Yeah, help me to understand that a little bit more, Rohit, because I don't work in telcos anymore. So I'm hearing this message over and over again that 5G is a very fundamental game changer in a way we should approach risk management and assurance, because of the way what previously were the back office systems, which were separate to the network, there's no longer that separation anymore. Is it really that we're talking about such a integrated approach to running a business that it's impossible to make these separations and do some of the kinds of reconciliation work and split up the task as it used to be?
Oh, absolutely. I think let's try to examine two different dimensions here, right? One is the business dimension. Now, 5G promises to be a network where a lot of innovative new services will be launched, and many of these services will be through a combination of ecosystem players along with telcos, right? These services will be launched at a fairly rapid clip. So we are really talking about short time to market, and in many cases, product and services which have really short shelf life. All of this means, to me as a risk professional, significantly increased levels of risk. But at the same time, 5G offers a tremendous lot in terms of enablement for all of us in the industry. Now, when you examine the 5G architecture, it is a services based architecture. And almost every service out there, what we knew as service, voice as a service, is now an application, right? Network slice is an application. The good news is all the integration in 5G environment happens over APIs. It's no more over the traditional files. In CDR world, we used to talk about ASN.1 files. We used to talk about reconciliation between switch data as well as billing data or charging system data. That's completely changing, right? We are really talking about access to real-time streaming data for rapid decision making. Okay. What we are also seeing is that the architecture itself supports some real-time actioning framework. In the traditional network architecture, to go in and interrogate traffic and to act on it was rather complicated and very, very difficult. But 5G architecture allows for support for real-time actioning. All of this means, as technology providers, as I mean product builders like us at Subex, and also for professionals in the industry, it means access to some real-time streaming data, which can be easily integrated into, access to, as I mentioned, actioning framework, which means we can automate many of the actions. And definitely 5G means 5G cloud, 5G implies cloud transformation, which again means access to a plethora of capabilities in these solutions, plus merely how do I say, access to very very flexible processing environment, right? So to me, when I look at the 5G evolution as a risk and assurance professional, it means that I really need to start getting prepared for this onslaught of new tech, understand what's going to happen there, also understand the sort of new technology investments the people in this industry should be doing, understand what new capabilities they need to be bringing on table. For example, ability to work with AI/ML based systems, ability to support automated decisions, ability to integrate with network elements such as network DAF. I think these are some of the most promising capabilities which the 5G environment is bringing, and we should be exploiting. I mean,
yeah, and if you don't mind me cutting in here as well, I mean, this is also, I can see this reflected in the philosophy of your business, because as an outsider to Subex, it certainly seems to me as though you've really reoriented around your business around being able to offer this range of solutions, because you know that your customers need to have products and services in place to cover this range of risks. And it makes, to some extent, a lot of sense to get that from one source rather than to try to piece together a lot of different risk management technologies. Has that been very influential in your business, that thought process of being able to be like a one-stop shop for your customers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we are strategizing, when we are identifying what we need to be building for the future, the 5G reality is definitely a focus area for us. But we also understand that 4G and traditional network will continue to be relevant, right? Even as we are talking about 5G and the kind of new challenges we'll need to address, 4G will continue to be there. Fraudsters, cyber security, cyber attacks, plus risk assurance related leakages concerning 4G network will remain relevant. So we are in this stage, Eric, where we'll have to continue supporting the legacy requirements, and there will be a place for legacy controls and legacy means of managing fraud and fraud, security, and revenue assurance problems. But we are also in a phase where we are already starting to look at what the future is going to bring, and therefore working on addressing those challenges. So this is something that we have been continuously working on, Eric.
Absolutely fascinating. And it must be so challenging for you because this environment has moved on so quickly. But the good news is that the scale of these problems is so enormous, it justifies the investment. And the good news is that we do seem to have better executive engagement. If there was to be an area that you would say was typical that people need to particularly focus on to begin with, if there's a particular theme that people need to work on harder right now, whether it's from the survey data, your own experience, where would you say people should focus right now? Or is it impossible to say that people should focus because the risks are different for each of your customers?
I think within a customer, the risks are different. Definitely understanding what those new kinds of risks are should be a focus area for all risk professionals as well as technology providers like us. The RAG survey definitely points to the kind of challenges the industry is facing. So it definitely is extremely useful in taking on board these learnings from the survey and then applying it into our strategy and what is coming in future, Eric.
Well, I'm very excited. So I understand that we're going to have three of your colleagues, Rohit, joining us, so we can talk in a little bit more depth in future shows about the specific areas that are covered and how they relate to each other, but also looking a little bit more closely at the data. Is that right, Rohit?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, For the benefit of all the audience, like I promised at the beginning of this conversation, besides this opening discussion that I'm having with Eric, we have three more, such video sessions which are going to come up. One focused on revenue assurance, another focused on fraud management, and a third focused on cybersecurity, where my colleagues Ashwin, Nitin, and Kiran, respectively, are going to deep dive into these areas with Eric. So please stay tuned in, and please remember we are going to do these three sessions. So look forward to sharing learnings from the RAG survey and what the future holds along with Eric.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to be on the show with you today, Rohit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.